No Small Endeavor is brought to you by Progressive. Most of you aren't just listening right now. You're driving, cleaning, and even exercising. But what if you could be saving money by switching to Progressive? Drivers who save by switching save nearly $750 on average, and auto customers qualify for an average of 7 discounts. Multitask right now. Quote today at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. National average 12-month savings of $744 by new customers surveyed who saved with Progressive between June 2022 and May 2023. Potential savings will vary. Discounts not available in all states and situations. I'm Lee C. Camp. You're listening to No Small Endeavor. This is our unabridged interview series, actually, with my friend Clay Hobbs. Clay was diagnosed with terminal cancer, and some years into that journey with cancer, he made an unusual announcement to me that he had set for himself a predicted day of his own death, that he had accepted that he would soon be passing, and that he was then numbering his days for the remainder of the year until the anticipated time of his death. He knew it could be plus or minus, but his intention was simply to number his days and to take seriously with intentionality and care and love each day. I discussed this fact about a friend sharing this with me with my colleagues one day over lunch, and I asked them whether they thought it wise to pose to Clay the possibility of taping some interviews with him as he went through that process. One of my friends, Matt Hearn, who's an English professor, told me that in the Middle Ages there were these medieval death manuals where folks thought very carefully and intentionally about death in ways that we certainly seem to be uncomfortable doing so in our own day. And then as well, I've been aware over the last number of years that in many of the Greek philosophers, and those especially in the Stoic tradition, there's a strong emphasis upon memento mori, a Latin phrase that simply means remember the day of your death. And of course, in the Psalms, there's this line that says that to number your days is the beginning of wisdom. So I thought for all of these reasons, as my colleague Matt said, if you're asking us whether folks might be interested in listening to these conversations, he said, I think the answer is an absolute yes. So then I went and posed the possibility to Clay, and he was open to it. And I remain very grateful that Clay has now passed, but grateful for all that he shared in those months leading up to his death. I highly recommend, if you're one of our regular listeners just to the unabridged episodes, I highly recommend you checking out the produced piece we did on Clay that's entitled The Wisdom of Numbering Your Days. And special thanks to our producer, Carrie Harmon, who did such beautiful work on producing that piece. Here's the first interview taped in April, about 15 months prior to Clay's passing. This episode is sponsored by Lumen. Lumen is the world's first handheld metabolic coach. It measures your metabolism simply through your breath, and then the app gives you tailored guidance to improve your nutrition, workout, sleep, even stress management. It's simple to use. All you have to do is breathe into your Lumen first thing in the morning, and you'll know what's going on with your metabolism, whether you're burning mostly fats or carbs. Then Lumen gives you a personalized nutrition plan for that day based on your measurements. I've found myself wanting to learn more from it, so you can also breathe into it before and after workouts, meals, so you know exactly what's going on in your body. It's taught me a lot about the variables that impact our metabolism and its impact on all of our health. But more specifically, Lumen tells me about my own body, what's happening with my own metabolism. As I've talked about on the show, I was recently in Italy for 3 months, and I knew not a whit of the science of metabolism, so I tended to think a good way to top off a big meal of pasta and red wine was with a big old serving of gelato. And while I still think there will be times for that, now I understand the impact of nutrition on my body in real time. So if you want to take the next step in improving your health, go to lumen.me/endeavor to get 15% off your Lumen. That is lumen.me/endeavor for 15% off your purchase. Thank you, Lumen, for sponsoring this episode. I'm going to start with, this will be really short, but just for the sake of, because we will be kind of crafting this into a, we will be doing a lot of editing, moving stuff around and so forth and making a narrative out of it. But so if it's okay with you, let me start with a couple of kind of formal things.
Sure.
Just one, if you'll start with your name and your age,
Sure.
And a couple of short things. So let's just start there.
Okay. I'm Clay Hobbs, and I'm 54 years old.
And your diagnosis, your original diagnosis, and the year of diagnosis, or your age at that original diagnosis.
Yeah, sure. My original diagnosis was in February of 2017, and I had been battling with some stomach issues for a good period of time, but was not diagnosed because I had moved from Nashville to Austin for work. Had a new primary physician who just saw it as change your diet, but I was having some major issues. Sort of fussed with that for about 6 months before going into very acute pain. Ended up here for post-holiday stuff and went to the Vanderbilt ER and have full blockage, a tumor in my colon. And when they removed the tumor, they also harvested some lymph nodes, which is a fairly, I guess, part of the process. And they found that it had metastasized to my lymph system was the initial. And at that point, that puts you from, again, I have pretty limited understanding of the way cancer stages. And I think the variation of that it's not as precise as I would think it should be, but it's just the way it is. So because they were able to harvest, let's say, 17 lymph nodes that had some evidence of cancer out of, I don't remember the number, let's say 200, that ratio, they said, was high enough that moved me into a later stage of my diagnosis, which I think at the time was stage 3B. Mm-hmm. I could have that wrong, but I think it's stage 3B colon cancer. And there's a way more legal term for that.
Yeah. And then at that time, what sort of prognosis did they give you at that time?
It was really unclear, and it's kind of a whirlwind. So I go into the hospital with stomach pain, and I wake up they did a colonoscopy and said, "Hey, you have a full blockage. We have to put you right back under. This is late at night." So this is a little bit off topic here, but then I call in a friend of mine who's an attorney. We do a will because they say this is a pretty significant surgery. So I'm not expecting any of that. So we call in a friend of mine. We put together a will really quickly. And I come out of this surgery, and I wasn't expecting this. I came out of this surgery with a colostomy bag. So I'm now, my colon has been severed, and I'm now have a colostomy bag. And I'm being told that you'll be meeting with I'm just drawing a blank on the
oncologist. Maybe?
Oncologist, yes. Yeah. I'm drawing a blank. So you'll be meeting with an oncologist, which again, I had no experience with what even is that. Mm-hmm. So I mean, at some level I knew what it was, but I wasn't an oncologist. So pretty drastic waking up from that, and then being told, at that time they didn't have the results back from the harvesting. When they got the results back, they told me it was stage 3B. I had the prognosis was undetermined. I mean, it's clearly metastasized, which is bad because you allowed this to go on longer than, we didn't catch it early, we caught it late. And so this prognosis is not good. And obviously I started doing the math. I'm a math person. Some high percentage of greater than 90% don't live 5 years with the stage that I'm in. What was encouraging to me is the amount of lymph nodes that had the cancer was just barely above the limit that moved you from 2 to 3. It's like you're stage 2, and this is how I used to say it as well. I'm sort of stage 2-ish, stage 2, stage 3. So the initial prognosis was you're just barely past stage 2. You're just barely in stage 3, but it's because it has metastasized. And then not long after that, they found a small tumor in my liver, which moved me into a later stage 3. Again, the silver lining of that was, they could have found hundreds of tumors on my liver. They found one tiny little tumor. And it's like, well, that's where when I say it was not the diagnosis and the way that they refer to it is, if it's metastasized, it moves you into this stage. Mm-hmm. If there's a tumor on your liver, clearly this host has now moved to another vital organ.
Yeah.
So I took that as, yes, a negative, but the positive is there's only one. And so if we remove the one and we've gotten rid of the sort of the mother tumor, hopefully we can sort of right the ship. And that's when we had to go through the conversation around, well, what should you do next? the Western plan would be, we should do chemotherapy. And then I spent a lot of time going through the math of the effectiveness of that, the cost of that to your body, not really the financial cost, but the cost of what that's going to do to me, and really labored over whether I wanted to do that or not.
So when you look at businessman, you're looking at cost benefit analysis kind of to your body and yourself and your relationships. What are some of the main things that stood out to you in the cost benefit analysis of Western medicine approach to
treatment? If I could create a visual, it would be two lines. One is going to be the efficacy of the treatment. So let's say chemotherapy efficacy. How long do you have to go to get to above 80% efficacy, some high level, if it's going to be effective at all? And then and the other line would be the quality of life. So if the quality of life started high and the effectiveness was low, at some point they're going to cross. And so I was looking for that crossing point, or some box around that crossing point that would allow me to get the absolute minimum amount of chemotherapy needed to get to the highest effective level.
I see.
And, in some cases you might say, well, to get 100%, you go all through. It was a 12-round protocol. To get 100%, you got to go to 12 rounds. But the impact on your body it becomes most intense after round 8. So that obviously that's a place to start is, well, let's just go to 8. Well, at 8, the data would show that the efficacy is, let's just say 75%. And if you go to rounds 10, you'll get to 92%. So those extra 2 rounds are going to cost you, but they also really add to so that was the kind of conversation that the oncologist and I had every treatment. And initially, I really struggled with chemotherapy. There was a platinum drug that they add to it that sort of spikes the efficacy. It also is the most damaging from a neuropathy and other side effects. So it's powerful additive, but it's also really, really affects your quality of life. So we did that. The first thing we did was drop that because that was causing tremendous issues, which meant we were going to go at least another round or 2 longer because we dropped the platinum drug. And those were decisions that we made together, which I really appreciated. My oncologist, who he invited me into. I think he found it interesting, to say here's a person who looks at this analytically, and obviously he's a scientist, so that's interesting to him that you want to see it from this perspective.
So no frustration on his part.
Not really. I mean, interesting side note. When I first met him, I was like, we're not using him. Told my wife we're not using him. His first bedside interaction with me was lots of comedic, trying to bring levity to which I think is probably his way of just dealing with the situation.
Bedside manner kind of.
But I've not met him. I'm sitting here. I've just been told I've got this existential issue, and I'm meeting this guy, and he's cracking jokes, and it was off-putting to me. But Ange loved it. She's like, "Oh, he's going to be perfect." I'm like, "He's not. We're not seeing him again." Fast forward, I love him. Ange was right, and he has a lot of levity. Sometimes I have to try to bring him back to, "Hey, I'm here to find out something," and he's come to appreciate that about me, I think.
So at that point early on, and you're looking at numbers, what do numbers say about statistically what's the range of years you might have?
Yeah. So again, I think it's something like greater than 90% of the people with my situation don't make it to year 5. So at 2017, you'd be talking about 2022.
Yeah.
Specifically February, I think. Yeah. So that's what I was looking at is a pretty high, 90% is a very high percentage. I'm not going to live. Now, what does happen with the math is so many people die in the first year, and then more die in the second. And so what's interesting is the longer that you go, your percentages, you end up being more likely in that 10%. So if you look at the beginning, you're in the 10% you're hoping for. But if you make it through year 3, well, you've already made it through,
Yeah.
a big percentage of those folks are already gone. So you're way more likely to be part of that 10% category as time moves on.
Right. So early on, when you're doing your kind of analytical approach to treatments and so forth, what's the process like for you emotionally? How do you begin to grapple with the realities of this emotionally?
Yeah, I would say that has been the hardest part of the journey from beginning to even to now. I still struggle with depression as it relates to how to emotionally battle something that you're not going to win. I mean, the math says the only way for me at this point, the only way you win is through some sort of a miracle, which I think is good to hope for. But I've always been able to say, we live in a world where people die. I mean, we're all going to die unless God comes back before you die, which hadn't happened yet. So everybody that's ever lived has died. And we walk through it almost as if it's not real until you get to a certain phase in life when you start to accept it. So having to accept it in your bulletproof years when you feel, because, when you're 35 to 50, I think you feel pretty bulletproof as far as whatever you're doing in life. At least for me, that's how I see it. I really struggled with how to adjust to looking at life from that lens of my career. It ended differently than I wanted it to. I led this team through my chemotherapy from my couch. I identified someone to be kind of my right hand. In the end, the company that I worked for, the chairman of the board decided after I got healthy and came back that the new guardrails I'd put up to protect myself were not acceptable to him. So I went through all this, get back to work, and within really a month realized this is not going to work because it was a sort of a private equity led company. What they needed and what I was willing to give were not going to match. So that's an ending to my career. It was hard. People look at you differently when you have cancer. Like you're more fragile, you're more whatever. So that's emotionally. And then you don't die. So it's like, when people first hear it, it's like, oh, Dad's going to die. Well, then you wake up a year or two later, you're still alive. And it's like, it's not even news anymore. But yet I'm still dealing with it. Angie's still dealing with it. And I think that's probably been the emotional part of it is I want it to go on.
Yeah.
But it would be nice for cancer not to be a part of the conversation anymore. And it's never not part of the conversation. At least for me, it has never not been part of the conversation. I've not been able to, you see these slogans, you are not your cancer, or you're not defined by cancer. And I'm like, maybe. It seems to always be a part of my story.
You noted depression there. Has that been kind of a steady part of your experience, ups and downs with that, or what's that journey been like?
Yeah, I would like to say that it's not. And there probably are moments when it's not. But with my journey, there has been only brief gaps of things are good because we do these scans. You get scans every 3 months. At one point, it got extended to 6 months, but only for like a year. So there's always this day. And so far, every single time I've had the scans, there's been something. We've not had one of those, and they happen every 3 months since 2017. We've not had one time where they said, hey, we don't see anything. Your blood work's good. We don't see anything on the scans. Every single time, it's the best news we've ever gotten is, hey, your blood work looks good. We see something small over here that we're going to keep our eyes on. And it turned out to be a tumor. So you can see from just the way I'm explaining that, it's almost what I expect at this point. It's like, we'll go for scans here in about a month. I'm doing this new sort of regimen where I'm trying to give my immune system as much opportunity to fight. And I'm optimistic. Now, we've also planned if the tumors that are in my lungs now, which the last one doubled in size from the previous scan, if they continue to grow, then the next phase is I'm going to go to do this Gerson protocol, which probably means I'm going to fly to I'm going to go to Tijuana, Mexico, and do a 2-week, 2-week, more intense version of what I'm doing in a sort of playing around with now. So.
Yeah. So, but you had a significant development, end of last year or early this year?
Yes. So, when we did the first round of chemo, it did appear, while they had things they were looking at, things weren't growing as much for about a year. So I had these tumors that they had identified, but they were either very slow growing or they seemed to be in control. And then in 2018, there was one tumor that was growing, but it was just one. It was growing, and it was in a place where they could do what's called microwave ablation. So they went through my back with a needle that had essentially like a microwave on the tip of it, and they burned the tumor and the surrounding area. So that was 2018. I went all from that period, which is when we were in Israel, basically. When I got back from Israel, we did that. From that period, for about a year, we didn't do anything except scans, which was probably the most positive time. There were small tumors that were growing. And I say tumors, at the time they only knew of one. And so in 2020, we went in and cut out a third of my liver. And it was in a similar spot to where the other was, where the original one they had ablated was, to remove another tumor. And that was so I was in the hospital. So that's 2020. And then last year, 2021, I started having pain that I self-diagnosed in my upper back. This is a unique new thing. And we were watching some tumors at that time. So they moved forward my scans from 3 months to, I think it was a month and a half. And they could see that the tumors they were watching had begun to rapidly grow again. So that became, that was in the spring of last year. So the spring of last year, I'm having some pain. So I'm the one telling them at this time, hey, something's not right. They look at it, they go, yep, this tumor is growing very rapidly. And I may not remember all the details, but they ended up saying we should remove it. We can't do an ablation because it's close to your diaphragm, which is essentially where to back up, the one that they ablated was close to my diaphragm, but to get the margins, they were able to stay away from the diaphragm. And the reality after the fact is that's why it was able to come back, I think, is that procedure, they would have been better if they had just gone in and cut it out, because they were so afraid to not burn the diaphragm that they really didn't get clear margins. And so we're still dealing with the same location. So this time last year, they said, we're going to go in and get it. We're going to get it all. So they actually, when they went in, they took out my gallbladder, took out 2/3 of my liver that had regenerated. And they also cut into my diaphragm to get really clear margins. So the surgery was supposed to be 2 hours, ended up being like 5. I got out of the hospital, ended up back in the hospital with 2 liters of fluid on my lungs. There was a lot more happened in that procedure. A lot more, seems like my body did not handle it as well. And then post that, we went on another form of chemotherapy. So kind of what they do is they cut it out and they do chemotherapy I use the term to carpet bomb everything else. And so they were going through that process, and they have a new test, at least it's new to me, that was a DNA blood test that would say how much cancer is in your bloodstream. And so they did it before they did the chemo, and they did it after the chemo, and there was no perceptible change. So at some simplistic level, you could argue, and he does argue, that means that the chemo didn't work. And he had said,
he the oncologist.
One of the challenges is you look at some of these options, and none of them are great. It's like, well, if you do chemo, it's probably got about a 25 to 35% chance of success. So it's like, I mean, from a math perspective, you're like, why am I doing this? Well, we don't really have a better option. That's the option you have.
Yeah.
So it's not surprising that it didn't work, but it's disappointing that it didn't work.
Yeah.
So once they Did the test. They did a couple of other new tests that sort of confirmed not only did it not work from a DNA perspective, we actually don't have any targeted therapies or any immunotherapies that would likely, anything that we would identify would have a very minute chance. There was also a third type of chemotherapy that they could do, but again, based on the DNA testing, the two that we've already done were more likely to be successful than this one. And so that's when I made the decision, I don't think we should continue this path. And we now see that it has metastasized not only from your liver, it has now moved into your lungs, which is a natural progression of how the metastases works. Is it starts with one major organ, which is typically for colon cancer is the liver. The next place it typically would go is the lungs. And so that's what's happened. So those were the combination, is that the chemo didn't work. You're not a good candidate for any other really Western style of options, and it has moved to your lungs. And the one that we saw a spot on your lung, the last scan, it's doubled in size, even while you were doing the chemo. So that was the news that I got last year.
So then that leads to a change in your, I guess, approach not only to treatment, but kind of a certain sort of acceptance about where you are in this process?
Yeah. So I think I've always had some level of acceptance that we're all going to die and this is probably going to shorten my life. But I wouldn't say resignation, may not be the right word, but I'll use that word, my resignation of, let's just accept this. And how can we accept it and find peace in it? And not only just find peace, but is there a path where I could thrive with? Is there a path where I can mentally thrive? If I look around at the environmental factors that I live in, the economic situation I have, my friends, is there a way for me to take this situation and say, this is not a horrible hand. Just, this is the hand I have. Just play it. And so that's what I spent, in my morning journaling time, is trying to find a way to find not only just peace, but could I thrive during this period? And for me, I needed to find a way to name the period, which is kind of how I landed on this odd concept of from a spirit perspective, I feel strongly that I feel connected to this is going to happen in the next year. I hope it doesn't, but I think it's going to. It's probably not going to happen on 12/31 of 2022, but I needed some way to name it, to be able to put it into a plan that would give me peace. So I decided to call it my Ascension Day, name it, give it a date, just sit with it. I sat with it for a few days before I told my wife. I thought, I'd try to bring some levity, which didn't necessarily go over all that well. But so that's how I'm trying to navigate it.
So you settled on December 31.
269 days from today.
Yeah. So you got them numbered.
I number every day.
Yeah. What do you think that has given you as you've numbered your days? What comes along with that?
Well, it's really cool when it's 360 something days, and it's not as cool when it gets closer. And I'm sure that's going to feel really different, as it gets even shorter. But it has allowed me to have perspective, maybe to take a little more, and I mean this in a positive way, a little more control of what I'm doing with my time. And all of our days are numbered. We just don't know them. And I don't either. I feel like, it's roughly in that time. And so it's given me, on the positive end, it's given me focus. On the negative, I beat myself up when I waste time. If I look and go, this last week, I really didn't live with that concept at all. I just got into the whirlwind of reactive stuff, which I tend to do, is beat myself up over that.
I was reminded of, in classical tradition, there's this Latin phrase, memento mori, remember your death, or remember you're going to die, or remember you must die.
Yeah.
And there's a passage in where Plato is recounting Socrates' death. Plato has Socrates saying something like, philosophy is about nothing else but dying and being dead, which was it was pretty
somber.
Yeah, yeah. And then certainly among the Stoics, there's the memento mori tradition of the sobering reality of the fact that we're going to die. There's Epicurean, eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die. But there's also in the Hebrew Bible, there's our days are but like grass. Or the psalm that says, let us learn to number our days and therein get a heart of wisdom. Or First Peter will repeat in the New Testament will repeat the passage about our days are but like grass. James will say, our days are but like a vapor. Our life is but a vapor that appears for a little while and then vanishes away. And then, as I told you in thinking through whether to ask you to do this interview, I was reminded by a colleague of mine about how in the Middle Ages there are these kind of death manuals where they're reflecting upon death and they're trying to figure out what it looks like to die well. What are the virtues, the skills, the practices, the habits that help us to die well? And it seems to me that in our day and age, most of us, I think, I don't have any data on this, but my sense is that most of us spend most of our lives trying to ignore the fact that we're going to die. And yet there's this great tradition from a variety of perspectives that are saying, no, the meaning of learning to live well is actually being regularly mindful of the fact that you're going to die. Mm. How does that stuff resonate with you when you hear that kind of recounting of those sorts of traditions?
Yeah, I guess the feeling I get is it's encouraging to me that maybe I'm on the right track, that what my instincts, which I think are spirit-led, are pushing me to is the way you're going to thrive is to embrace this. Mm. And there will be some fear of the unknown, which is just, I think, natural. It's pretty natural. But the opportunity to make the decision to not chase this Western solution that likely will ravage my body and say, I feel pretty good today. And how do I thrive with that? Now, there's going to come a day when I'm not here, but my hope is that my God-given immune system will perform well without all of this other stuff for as long as it's going to. And that my last days, I'll have some physical capabilities that I might not otherwise have if I chased trying to live longer. My mental, I might not be, I won't be in the chemo fog as much as I've been in the last couple of years, because it's a real thing to me. I've been in a fog through that process. To be able to be clear-minded for some period of time, I'm excited about that. I'm excited about the things that I've identified as opportunities to do in this last period of time that I have. I'm also excited about being open-minded to new things that might fall on my list. Like, actually, this is one of those. This was not something that I was thinking about, but when you mentioned it, I'm like, this would be a wonderful thing for my list. And there's a little bit, in a positive way, Lee, there's a little bit, I really hope I say this right, there's a selfishness that is not normal for me, that I would like to say, I want to be a little selfish and try to enjoy time with people that really matter to me. Mm. And if I could communicate this clearly, it's a pure selfishness. It's not this hedonistic selfishness. Yeah. It's like this type of selfishness is more about, man, God's given you this little bit of time. What are you going to do with it?
Yeah.
Again, from a pure perspective of how can you wring the most out of that in a beautiful way?
Yeah.
Which I don't think that gift, when people think about living well, I think a lot of people miss that. Living well in the maybe in a worldly definition, is a little bit askew of what I'm talking about. I mean, I'm talking about something more Christ-like, more in the vein of what God would choose for me.
Yeah. In the virtue traditions, desire is not problematic. What's problematic is a disordered attachment to a desire. But in the virtue traditions, one finds joy in the rightful enjoyment of desire, including things like sociability and friendship,
right,
and enjoying a meal rightly, or enjoying the pleasures of life rightly. Those are that's not only not a problem, but it's like part and parcel of what it means to live a good life.
Yeah.
And so I love your description of that.
This past week, I had the opportunity. I am doing more of this last minute opportunities. I just do it. So I was in Austin for work, and I couldn't get back here to do the meeting I needed to do in Austin. I was going to miss the flight that I wanted to be on. So the next flight was like 11 o'clock, and I was going to arrive at midnight. I'm like, I just don't like to do that. Plus, I've always had bad luck with late flights out of Austin. So I'm like, I don't want to do that. So there was a flight to Tampa from Austin. My son lives in Tampa. He's moving. He's moving to Austin, actually. But he lives in Tampa. He's a sports nut. And we've done spring training baseball games together. And so I said, I'm going to fly to Tampa instead. They had canceled. They had canceled spring training. They restarted it. So we thought we weren't going to get to go. So he and his wife book a couple of baseball games. And Thursday night, I fly to Tampa. Friday afternoon, we're at a baseball game. And Saturday. Now, the downside is the weather was terrible and it rained. The positive is I sat in the bleachers. One game, I sat right behind a home plate and got to sort of relive baseball from seeing it so close up, and the pitches are coming right at you, and that's so cool. The second game, we sat in the right field bleachers at a spring training, very relaxed, had a table. These bleachers had a table, and I'm sitting in right field with my son and his wife, eating peanuts and drinking a beer. What a wonderful opportunity.
Yeah.
I mean, it was just like, now never mind, the rain came, and interesting fact, someone got hit by lightning at this game. So it was really bad storm, but just enjoying the moment of being able to open a bag of peanuts with my son in right field at a spring training baseball game, and really savor that. It was special.
That reminds me, and you and I may have talked about this passage, but there's in Cal Newport's book, Deep Work, he makes this case for what he calls the neurological argument for depth, and talks about the connection between attention and happiness. And he quotes a science writer. Her name's Winfred Gallagher, and she had written this book called Wrapped. And she wrote it out of her own experience with cancer. And she was paying attention to the fact that how she was often not mired in fear and pity, but often found it at various occasions quite pleasant, focusing on the things that mattered to her. And so for like 5 years, she studied her experience. And then she became convinced, he says, that she had a grand unified theory of the mind. And here's a quote from her. She says, like fingers pointing to the moon, other diverse disciplines from anthropology to education, behavioral economics to family counseling, similarly suggests that the skillful management of attention is the sine qua non of the good life and the key to improving virtually every aspect of your experience. And so I hear you talk about, you're paying attention, and it's in those moments of paying attention that you have this sort of rather pleasant experience.
Yeah.
Does that resonate
It does,
with your experience?
Yeah, I think that whether I'm sitting in a conference room in Austin, just almost giddy that I'm getting to get a last lap in my career. I mean, the way that the job thing came around for me with Pagaya or going to a spring training game, what I do sense is that my ability to be present is significantly amped up over what it used to be. And I'm able, because I'm paying attention to it, I notice how other people aren't. Because it's just not necessarily a natural thing. Is I'm sitting in a meeting and I'm sort of giddy that I'm getting to do this again. Everybody else is like, oh, we're in another business meeting, and and I'm at the ball game, and I think my son's probably pretty present, but everybody's disappointed that the rain is going to come in, and the game doesn't matter. What matters is I'm sitting here eating peanuts with my son at a spring training ball game.
What are other marks that you note of how other people are not paying attention?
Yesterday, I had a chance to. Ange and I went from no grandchildren to 3. And so yesterday we had the fun opportunity of having 2 of our 2 grandsons, which are both 10 and 11 months old now. I say I was in meetings most of the day. Ange had both of the kids. And there was a brief time when I was able to come downstairs and just get to be around both of them. I watch young parents, and I was the same way, navigating sleep time, feeding time, screaming babies. And as a granddad, I think this is probably true for all grandparents, but I'm just looking in their eyes, and it's just fascinating to me to think about what they're going to do and what they're going to, what lies ahead for them. And that's an example, I think, of just, I would like to think I would have been that way anyway, but I don't know that I would have been that way. I wasn't that way as a dad. I was mostly focused on disciplining them right. Are they behaving well in public, or all the silly things that didn't really matter. And I do hear some of that from my kids, like, you should probably not worry about that as much. But I try not to get into other people's journey too much. But, that's an example. I think, work is an example. Getting to do something professionally and get paid for it that you're good at. And not being so worried about what's next. I think a lot of people in their careers are very fixated on, I don't know if it's from fear-based or what's behind the performance. I need to get to the next place. I need to get this. I need to get that. And for me, I'm just enjoying this particular season. At least I'm trying to just enjoy the fact that I'm on the ride. I'm not trying to go up one level in my career. I just want to be able to do this for a little while. I'm not that concerned with the politics of it. As it relates to things like being a grandfather, just being able to marvel at their smile is just a new thing for me.
What about dealing with or processing regrets? Shoulda, coulda, wouldas.
Yeah, that's probably, I don't know how much of that is unique to me and the fact that I'm a 2 on the Enneagram, or what is behind my own makeup, but I'm a person who does internally second guess and ruminate and litigate internally lots of things I've done, lots of statements I've made, lots of decisions I've made. I always probably think I could have done things better. And I have plenty of my biggest regrets in life are usually impulsive moves that I've made that either my ego pushed me to make, or that I allowed myself to get too tied into my own ego. I made some pretty poor choices as a husband in my first marriage that had consequences to my children and my ex-wife that I have deep regret around.
I would assume at a time like this that it's quite natural to be aware of thinking about one's mistakes while also wanting to avoid the unhelpful ruminating upon them. Have you sorted out, when does reflecting upon one's past in that way, is it helpful, and at what point does it become counterproductive or damaging?
Yeah, I think that has been a lifelong journey, sort of in parallel but separate from this more existential issue. I stayed, I would say, almost stymied by some of those regrets for much of my 40s. And at some point, I would liken it to you kind of walking down the middle of the road. You need to be on one side or the other of this road. And I stayed in the middle of the road for a long time. And at some point, you got to decide, get over here and And you've apologized as much as you can apologize. You've done all you can do to fix the things that you've done wrong. And it's not productive to stay stuck. Let's move forward. And don't allow that to define who you are. It is part of the definition of who you are, but it doesn't have to be the defining thing about you. It's what you do with it. How do you, as I said, how can I be the very best ex-husband that I can be? I want to be a kind person. And how can I be the best dad I can be in spite of the fact that my kids suffered through divorce and the consequences that come with that? How can I be a great dad today? I had a great conversation with my ex-father-in-law, I think he's 84. And I didn't realize I committed to this, but one of my sons told me I did, so I'm going to do it. My father-in-law, who I know favored me, and was so disappointed that his daughter and I divorced. Somehow in the last year, in a conversation I had with him, I committed to going and sitting on his front porch in Lawrenceburg, Tennessee, and having coffee with him and sort of recreating what we used to do when I was I was like a student for him. He was a mentor for me in lots of ways. And so when we talked, I think it's probably been 6 weeks ago, we were talking about how much we both enjoyed that. And I didn't realize I did it, but I'm gonna go ahead and do this because I think it'd be fun. Is go sit on his front porch, have a cup of coffee, and at his point at being 84, I think he's looking forward to that, and I am too.
Yeah. So this has been kind of, once you set your 12/31, what you're calling Ascension Day, you've planned out a number of things that you hope to do for the year.
Yes.
What are some of those things, and or how have you thought about what you want to prioritize?
Yeah. So the macro level view is, I think most all of us have lots of friends. Not all of us, I shouldn't say it that way. For me, I have lots of what I would call casual friends. And then my personality is I've always been a person who would have 2 or 3 really deep friends. And so over my life, I look at that group of people and my family and what I decided made sense to me in my last lap of my life. It would be fun because they don't necessarily see it from the vantage point that I see it from, is I would like to do something with you that you'll remember when I'm gone, and bring a smile to your face. And so it doesn't have to even be anything big. If I played golf with this person, go play a round of golf and be really present with them. They don't realize this is the last time we're going to play golf. And we might state it, we might not. My son probably doesn't, because he said, next year we're going to Scottsdale for spring training. Okay. In my mind, we're not going to spring training again. That was it. I enjoyed those peanuts with you one last time. Now, if I'm lucky to go past the 12/31 Ascension Day, then we'll go to Scottsdale. But in my mind, I wanted that to be special because it was the last time. So that's what I've tried to do in my list of things. It's not a large list of people. It's not an overwhelming list of things to do. I mean, my wife and I next week we're flying into San Jose, and we honeymooned 10 years ago up and down the California coast. So we were in San Francisco, then we were in Santa Barbara. I'm going to get this order wrong. We were in Monterey, then Santa Barbara. And some of those were really awesome, and some of them were not so great. But we ended up starting in San Francisco and journeying our way down to LA, and we flew home. And it was I think it was a 10-day honeymoon. A lot of fun. She planned it all, which has been the case for almost all of our trips. So we're going to recreate parts of that we enjoyed. So we're going to spend time in Santa Barbara and Monterey, a little bit of time in probably LA. I think her parents may come over. And again, it's something that we probably won't get to relive our honeymoon again. This is one thing. I've got a trip. I think I mentioned to you privately, I'm going to fly with a friend who he and I talked about flying, and I was a private pilot for a moment in time. That's a longer story, but I didn't really finish it. And so it's been it's always bugged me that I didn't finish it. So watching people who actually do it and love it, this friend of mine actually, he talked about it. Since he and we haven't really been around each other in the last few years. He bought a jet He's financially done well. He bought a jet. He has his own hangar and happens to live in Arizona. So he's flying to Nashville. He and I are going to fly in his jet. I'm going to go to Dodger Stadium baseball game with my brother. He and I grew up going to Vero Beach to the Dodger Town spring training complex. My dad would get us out of school. It seemed like we went all the time. We probably went less than 10 times, but it seemed like we went all the time. He's going to fly out and go to a Dodgers game with me when my wife and I are going to go to Pepperdine one last time. We have good memories of being on the campus, and just spiritually, that was always a really strong encouragement to me, a once a year thing that we would do. We haven't done that, with the pandemic, we haven't done that for a few years. And actually, even before the pandemic, it didn't lose its interest in us, but sometimes you do things for lots of years, you take it for granted. Right. So we've kind of decided maybe we're done with that, but we're going to do it one last time.
Yeah.
So I'm excited about that. That's just a few things, but I have a list of things.
Yeah. Last question for today. I remember when you and Angela and Laura and I were in Israel, Palestine together, and you said it was 2018, right?
That's right.
Yeah. March or April, May, maybe it's 2018.
I think it might have been May.
Okay. And that was not long after you had gotten your initial diagnosis. And I think it was during that time, I remember one particular conversation we had, and I may be conflating a couple of conversations, but as I recollect, you alluded to the fact that you had been a utility player in baseball and called yourself average. And you also said that you weren't really interested in having a big funeral, and that you kind of thought that someone who has lived a good life should be quite content with not leaving too much of a fuss in their wake. And that struck me as just beautifully wise.
Yeah.
How'd you get that insight, you think? Or what brought you to that?
Well, I think that in lots of things, it's usually multiple points bring you to a place that you arrive. So when you unpack that, in my own sort of, as I described myself as a utility player, I had a younger brother who was the star. He was drafted. He was the kid who would throw a no-hitter and hit a home run in the game. He was like the star all the time. So I got comfortable, because it was just the way it was, that I'm a pretty average baseball player. But I learned to play a lot of positions. I also remember a sermon that was very freeing to me. This is multiple thoughts here, but I really, really like Richard Beck. I've listened to him at Pepperdine. He spoke at Otter Creek a few times. And he did a sermon one time that was very interesting to me. And it really gave new thoughts to something I already felt. And I don't remember the exact title of the sermon, but the concept was, it's actually okay to be average. It's good to be average. Most of us are, by the way. We just are trying not to be. And if you could just embrace that, what's not average is Jesus. But and I'm totally butchering this, probably, he would be like, was not my point at all. You missed it. So I look at life and I think you can spend a lot of time trying to create a legacy. And again, if you look at the data, whether you like it or not, you're not going to be remembered almost one generation past your life. So you're only going to impact, in a deep way, a handful of people. So just do that well and don't make a big fuss about it. And like I look at this opportunity to talk to you. I mean, the primary thing is it'll be a gift for my kids. Maybe whatever that comes of this will be something they can ultimately. I have a very clear view that my impact is a very small ripple in the overall scheme of life. But I've had a big impact on a handful of people. And I'd like to do that well. And then as they navigate life, maybe there's one or two nuggets that they associate with me or they don't that impact how they walk their lives. And if that's what your life, impact you have is a small positive impact in a few people, that's good.
Yeah.
If you make it bigger than that, I think you're probably fooling yourself. For the majority of us, obviously there are people who do have a legacy and everybody knows their names, but that's not.
But even still, probably only a couple of generations.
Yes.
Right? Yeah.
So to just figure out how to be at peace and actually be good with that.
Yeah.
It's just always felt natural to me.
Well, I'm not going to conclude this interview at this point because you've agreed about maybe we could have a few more conversations, shorter conversations over the next year.
Yes.
But that's a really good place for us to pause at least.
Okay.
But before we actually shut the recorder off, has this felt reasonably comfortable, this conversation?
It has. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm enjoying it. You may throw it all away when it's done, but I'm enjoying it. Nothing else. I'm enjoying chatting with you, Lee.
Yeah.
I mean, you're
Same
one
here.
of my
Same here.
favorite people to chat with.
Same here with me. So thank you.
Yep.
Very good.
All right.
A month after our first recorded conversation, Clay and I met online for a second talk. He had done some traveling, visited New York, gone to California with his wife Angela to retrace the steps of their honeymoon, and he'd even had a chance to help fly a friend's plane.
Good.
What do you say?
Oh, all is well. You got my message on the flight?
Yes. So you flew Honda Jet from Nashville to where?
So we stopped in Hebert, Oklahoma, because he could get jet fuel for $3.59 a gallon.
Oh my!
You had to pump it yourself. It was the middle of nowhere. They had this little FBO that it felt like a zombie apocalypse kind of thing. There's nobody there. The back door's open. There's a plastic bag over the urinal. The Coke machine is out of service. There's this flagpole with no flag, and it's jingling. The metal is jingling on the flagpole. Like, we are in the middle of nowhere. So we pumped the fuel and got back in the air. But I think I told you he let me essentially do the foot the pedal part and then also lift. It was so amazing. I was
bet.
just like, oh my gosh, because I flew those little Cessnas way back, but it's been a long time. I'm like, Spencer, you don't want me to run your jet off the runway? I haven't done this in a long time. He's like, Clay, there won't be any yaw on. It's not the same. This two jet engines on both sides of the plane.
Huh.
As long as you get started straight, if you don't do anything crazy, we'll stay in the middle of the runway.
Huh. That's amazing. That's pretty cool. Okay. So, in addition to the flight, I'd love to hear kind of what all's been going on. So, I think the week after we talked, you left and went to New York and then to California.
Yeah. So I went to New York and started feeling bad in New York. And I thought, it looked like I'm a little orange. And I thought, well, I've been doing a lot of juicing, and it's the beta carotene in the carrots. So I'm attributing that to the carrot juice. Then I'm itching like crazy. And I thought I either gotten bed bugs from this hotel room, or there's something it had one of those pump things for the soap in the shower.
Yeah.
Like somebody's put something in this, or I've got bed bugs. I'm itching all over.
Huh.
So I get home, let's say at 9:00 at night from that trip, and we're supposed to fly the next day to California. I said, Ange, I don't feel well. She's like, should we go? I'm like, yeah, I can feel bad in California. It's like I can't here. I'll probably let's get to California. I'll recover. We'll be, we're going to be in a beautiful place. And so we went, and I started getting more and more because I was getting jaundiced. So then my eyes are looking weird, and I think I had a white shirt on, so it was stark. So then I have this text tree with my oncologist and my primary that I can reach out to them, and I was describing my symptoms, and he's like, you have a blockage in your bile duct. And before, when I had the surgery last summer, there was the tumor had wrapped around my bile duct. Yeah, I think that's right. And they nicked it when they were getting the tumor. So they knew they had damaged it, and there was some concern that this could happen. So I ended up in the hospital, but I think I may have told you I got stabilized, and this was, let's say, on a Friday. And they weren't because of my specific health conditions. They got me stabilized. So they weren't going to do any procedure until Monday. So I'm now going to be stuck in the hospital Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday. And I convinced them that, hey, I'm stable. It's my wife's birthday. We came here to go whale watching. Makes sense to me that you got me stable. I've got an antibiotic. I think I'm going to check out, and I'll just try to get home and do my procedure from home. If things get worse, I'll come back. So they let me out. We went and had an amazing whale watching. There was like six or seven breaches of humpbacks and orcas, and they were kind of jostling with each other because the orcas had killed something and the humpbacks were trying to protect it. It was amazing. And then all these dolphins swimming around the boat, different species of dolphins. So it was great. And I didn't feel great, but it was still really, really good.
Yeah.
So then I ended up running a fever, so I went back in the hospital, and they put 2 stents in my bile duct on Monday. So,
okay.
So I was able to get out of the hospital, go do what I wanted to do. Came back Sunday night at like 8:00, and they had a room for me.
Wow.
So yeah, and then I think we flew home on Tuesday. Tuesday or Wednesday.
Did the procedure on Monday and flew back on day or two.
I think it must have been Wednesday. Yeah, I got out of the hospital on Tuesday, and then we flew on Wednesday.
Yeah,
if I remember correctly. So yeah, but I developed pancreatitis from that. So I guess it's a common happens when you have that procedure or that issue, which was not fun. I've never had that before. That was pretty rough. But it's resolved itself. Huh. It's resolved itself. So yeah. So then I flew to New York for a day trip. This business, again, this sort of my trying to write a happy ending with my different things. One of them is my career. I'm exiting the acupuncture clinic in Cool Springs, and I'm enjoying my real estate stuff. So I have this company that I'm wanting us to acquire. They had a window where the founders could be in New York and meet with the 3 founders of the company that I represent. But it was going to be a Tuesday. And so even though the following week, I'm like, I can't travel. We decided going to do a day trip. I'm going to fly up, do it. And I didn't feel great, but the meeting went so well. I was on kind of a business high, just because it's like a hobby for me. So I was just because you put this thing together, you put a plan together and it goes well. I'm like, oh, this is awesome. So I'm flying back on Southwest plane, and I text Ange, and my friend had asked me if I wanted to fly this jet. And I told him, Spencer, I can't do it. I've been sick, but I will come over to John Toon, and I'll say hi to you. I'd like to see your jet. So I told him I would do that on Wednesday. I said, I'm going to be out of town Tuesday, but I'll do it on Wednesday. And he was flying on Wednesday. So I'm in the plane flying back from New York, and I'm such a business high. I text Ange and I say, hey, I know you're going to think this is crazy, but I think I want to go ahead and do that flight to Phoenix tomorrow. And she's like, you shouldn't do that, but I know it's kind of a once in a lifetime thing, and you want to do it, so you should just go ahead and do it. So I did it, and then I woke up Thursday morning early and took the first flight home. And so
you flew out there with him, and then you flew commercial back.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Right. Yeah. It was awesome.
Remind me what I remember you telling me something about when you were doing flying when you were younger, you had encountered a block of some sort.
Yeah. So I was running a private ambulance company. We had 2 Lear jets and 4 helicopters. So we had our own hangar, and one of the owners had a little Cessna. We had 43 locations across the state of Texas. So I'm flying around with this kind of old guy, and I'm looking at him. It's just the 2 of us flying every now and then. I'm like, something happens to him, I'd be in trouble up here. So I should learn how to fly. So I went through the ground school, did 33 hours of flying. Loved taking off. Just so exhilarating taking a plane off the ground.
Yeah.
Passed the ground school, did 33 hours of flying. But I really had a block around landing. I just didn't trust the equipment to to do it. And it seemed like we always we land in Beaumont just past these power lines, and they weren't in play at all, but visually they were always in play for me. And there was one time we were coming in, and the guy that was an instructor had an old cigar that he would have. He was just chewing on it. He wasn't smoking.
Yeah.
And he would sit back, and he was just sitting back and coaching me. And one time we came in, and at the very end, you just kind of pull back, and it's kind of an organized crash where you just kind of come in. And so we're coming in for the landing, and we've done all these touch and goes, and I'm coming in, and for some reason, I push forward.
Oh.
And he falls out of that seat, and he's about 5 expletives at me. He's so mad at me. He's like, "What is wrong with you?" And I just, it's like, I'm like, I don't know what happened. I just had a panic moment. And because that business ended up I won't go into it, it's a long story, but I had an FBI investigation for the 3 founders. It was I put 2 years of my life into this thing. All of a sudden, we're being investigated for Medicare billing fraud, which they weren't guilty of, but they were guilty of some sloppy billing. And the Medicare and the FBI said, "Clay, you just need to stay out of the way of this. We're going to investigate these guys." I used that as sort of I need to focus on this business. And so I stopped flying with the view of, I'll pick this up again someday. But right this moment, I got to focus on this. I think it was probably that, but it was also, I was so afraid to solo that I found a reason not to do it, frankly.
Yeah.
And so it's always been kind of a little bit of I wouldn't say unfinished business, but a couple of years ago, I researched kind of starting over down in Smyrna, and I found an instructor, but I didn't do it. So landing has always been the part that I just not as comfortable with.
Yes.
So
it is can be uncanny in the sort of anxiety that can provoke in early days.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So.
Did the flight with your friend give you any sort of resolution, or was it just a sort of what was that like?
Well, so he used to work for me, and he was telling me the story of when the pandemic started. He bought a citation sight unseen in Paris, France, for like $1 million less than it was worth. So he flew out there, got it flying back, and then he sold it for about $1.5 million more, like $2.5 million more than he paid for it.
Wow.
Which gave him the money to buy this Honda Jet, which is a 2017. And so he's living the sort of the dream that I had at one time in my life, and I'm watching him. So I'm like, I wasn't jealous, but it's like, oh man, he's got this plane. It costs him, some amount to operate, but he already knows he's in the money when he sells it. It's worth more than he paid for it.
Yeah.
And, but it was the taking the plane off the ground up to 10,000 feet, having to get into sort of a flight pattern. It was it's just so exhilarating, And then when we landed both times, I reminded me this is stressful because it's a small jet. You're coming in, and not the same as a Cessna, but it scratched, I guess, the itch in some level. But if I was healthier, like say I was maybe same age, but thought I was going to live a long time, I might want to pick it back up because it reminded me how much fun it is. And there's a certain part of I would like to overcome that fear of landing, but not, for where I am in life, it was really, really sweet. And
that's great.
I think, again, it's a memory for me, but I really think it'll be a really cool memory for him. I didn't necessarily position it that way, but I think when I'm not around, he will, because he could see how thrilled I was to get to it. So,
yeah. So what's coming up?
So I'm flying to we last weekend. So I flew back home, immediately started pressure washing the yard. We had a 1-year birthday anniversary for my oldest grandson. My son Sam's little boy, his name's Eli. His 1-year birthday was last Saturday, so we had a party for him. Lots of family and friends there, which was great. So that's another thing that's kind of fun. I may not be around for that again, but I got to be around for the 1-year birthday of our oldest grandson. In a sweet way, my ex-wife and her husband and a former brother-in-law and his wife, they came to the party. So it was nice for me to get to say goodbye to them. They didn't know that. They probably didn't know that's what I was doing. But for me, it was, it was kind of odd to have an ex-wife at your house In some ways, for Ange, it was probably more odd than me, but it was nice to be able to say goodbye. And we took a picture with our grandson. That'll be a nice gift for her. I think will be kind of cool, and she seemed to appreciate that. So that was the next thing. So that's exciting. And then Thursday of next week, Ange and I are going to fly to Phoenix, and we'll be in Scottsdale. I'm not a huge golfer. I like golf, but I don't love golf. I used to love it, but I like it. It takes a long time, and I like to play about 12 holes. But my brother-in-law loves golf. We've played a lot over the years. So he and I and our wives are going to play in Scottsdale. So we're going to play as a couples, a small at a par 3 course, and then he and I are going to play this place called Troon North, which he's super excited about. So that'll be fun. It's kind of my sort of farewell thing with him is golf.
Yeah,
a lot of my friends, that's kind of their thing. So golf is an easy thing to do as a kind of a last check thing.
Yeah,
so that'll be with him next week. That's what's up next. We canceled our Malibu trip. Just because of my health at the time. We decided that was going to be too much back to back to back. Yeah. We would be there now, I think. I guess it would be this week. And then we were going to do that Dodgers game with my brother. I'm going to reschedule that. So still do that.
Yeah, cool. Have you mentioned in that with your ex-wife and for you kind of saying goodbye. And I remember you talking about going to the spring break games with your son, and for you kind of knowing, or at least you anticipating that this won't happen next year, but you're not saying anything about that to your son. Have there been any encounters that you've had where you have kind of voiced, this may be the last time I see you, or a formal goodbye in that way? Or
I think that they should deduce that from when people have asked me, how are you doing? I've said, well, from a progression, obviously this is colon cancer that metastasized initially to my liver. I've had, 4 procedures on my liver. It's now on my lungs. There's 3 tumors on my lungs that in the last scans, they doubled in size. And we've tried the 2 most likely forms of chemotherapy we tried did not work. And so at this point, I'm just navigating what can my own immune system do to fight. So I feel like I did tell that to my ex-wife, asked me, how are you doing? So I told her all that without saying, I'm saying goodbye to you today. I did let her know that, we are no longer really trying to fight the cancer. I'm just trying to feel good and live life. Yeah. And I said the same thing to Spencer. And I did look at him and say, if I don't see you again, I really, really, this has been awesome. Thank you. So I without explicitly saying I'm saying goodbye to you, I have, because I'm not giving up hope. I still hope for a different outcome. And my doctor did tell me this past scan, yes, your tumors did double, but they are small. They're about 1 centimeter. And at 1.5 centimeters, I want you to consider radiation because your lungs move. It's a moving target because you're breathing. But when they're big enough, not too big, there's kind of a sweet spot. When they're about 1.5, we could, through probably 2 rounds of radiation, have a decent shot at really impacting those 3 tumors. So, and the positive is this last round, I didn't have any new tumors, either on my liver or my lungs. Huh. And then he mentioned a 3rd round of chemo, which I'm not that open to, Lee, but he said this 3rd round of chemo does not have the platinum additive, which is what the first 2, to make it more effective. They've given me this, it's called oxaliplatin. And that my body really didn't tolerate that well at all. So he's like, I know you don't really want to do chemo, but just know that this 3rd, if I could convince you to do it, I think it's probably worth a try at some point. It shouldn't have the same side effects, the same impact on you as the first 2. And so what I told him is, okay, let's don't do anything right now. He wanted to go ahead and take my case to tumor board. I said, I'd rather you can do that, but I'm not open to the radiation until the tumors are 1.5 centimeters. And I'm not open to chemo until the tumors are 2 centimeters. So we're not going to, because what they've done in the past is they've said, let's say that we were ablating or we're cutting out the tumor, then he wants to immediately follow up with chemotherapy almost as a preventive. It's like, it's like it might help, might not, but let's do it as a preventive. And so I'm no longer going to do that for sure. So if he had come back to me this past Tuesday after going to the tumor board and said, we want to go ahead and do the radiation and then we'll do chemo right after, I just let him know I'm not open to that, because we've kind of done that play twice. And all it really did was really, really age me. It's puts my family on a roller coaster of having to live with, it's just a 6-month process, live with me being sick for 6 months, which then takes 3 or 4 months to recover. If you can see me today, I'm healthier right now than I've been probably in about a year. So it takes a while to get back to, sort of where you started once you do the chemo. And so far it's been, for naught. So I mentioned to you last time, I don't want to chase my health to the point that I prematurely kill myself. And I already feel a little bit guilty of that. So I'm not as open to that.
Yeah. What sorts of things, if any, in thinking through ups and downs of emotions, or just insight into big questions of meaning of life, or anything like that going on? Or are you more just focused on the now and the adventures and what's going on around you?
I think that it's always just right below the surface. I have the external, writing a happy ending, kind of having a farewell tour, trying to make levity around it. But then when it's just me, sometimes I can listen to a specific song. One time my wife said to me, I just don't want you to leave. And there's this one song, I'm trying to remember who the singer is. It's neither one of us wants to be the first to say goodbye. I forgot who the singer is. It's a female singer. But for some reason I've listened to that song a lot and I just bawl. I just am a puddle of tears listening. It's like it has some therapy to me, but it also just I just totally crumble because of the not wanting to say goodbye, to my wife, not wanting to leave, and not wanting her to feel that. So it's always right below the surface. But then there are times when I can sort of, like this past Sunday, we went to church, and sometimes when I go to church, I'm very moved by music. And Randy was the worship leader this past week, and he sang songs that are moving, and I could have almost bet you I'm going to cry through this entire service. But on the way to church, I just lifted my head and said, today's going to be about praise. I'm just not going to be open to being sad today. I'm going to praise God. And so I just, somehow I did that. I don't know where that comes from, but, so I guess that's where I would say, as far as the life's questions, I think based on your education and your deep thinking, what I really struggle with is I think I understand sort of the view of a fallen world, and with free will comes some of these things with, like we see in the bigger picture of the world, like with what's going on in Ukraine. And part of what comes with free will is good and bad. But when I back up from that, I still sort of say, but God, you designed this. You're supposed to be omniscient. You're supposed to be all powerful. You created humans. Why did you create us with these flaws? Like, that doesn't seem like a very intelligent design to me. And I have this fear of, I don't ever want to be like I think about Job questioning God, and all of a sudden, where were you? Where were you? Like, I don't want that. I don't want you being angry with me. But I really question how, if you're so amazing and powerful and you created something that's flawed, that doesn't seem all that powerful to me. Doesn't seem all that intelligent to me. And that's something I've just struggled with from a faith perspective. It's like, you created humans, and this isn't good. I can look at Ukraine and what's happening and say, it's free will. What a cop out. This is what you built? Come on. maybe you should try totally again. so that's been my most current struggle is like, that doesn't make sense to me. And I don't know how to answer that. I don't say that out loud to too many people because I feel that feels weird. But
yeah.
And the last thing
I appreciate you sharing that.
We've had some deep, again, I'm right below the surface. They'll pray for me and we talk about death, and they're, everybody says, "Oh, you're walking this so just beautiful how you're walking it." And I'm like, if you just knew how much I've actually struggled on the inside.
Yeah.
But I did ask, I'm going to try to connect something. As I've been thinking about my life, I have made an outline. I didn't bring my notes up here as I was looking around for my book. I've made an outline of a book that I would write about my life, really for my kids. And that outline has, chapters that begin sort of, it's pretty simple. It would be a pretty simple book, like 5 chapters. And one of them would be, happy endings would be kind of and then lessons learned would be kind of the end. I have this, if I'm going backwards in order, one would be like the lost years. When I think about my divorce and sort of the season of my life right after that, I actually kind of characterize as lost years for me, where I just lost my way. I have my early years with, sort of I was a very curious kid. So I have a sort of an outline of here's the story of my life. And I mentioned to Randy, hey, I would like you to lead the worship part of my funeral, which I think will be a fairly simple funeral. He's like, I could tell by his face, he's like, oh my gosh. I'm like, you don't have to do it. He goes, no, it's just you and I are close and it would be hard. Because I obviously I've done funerals, but it would be hard. I'm like, but Randy, what I want is I want you to help unpack a story. And these are the chapters, and I want the music to follow the story. And his eyes lit up. He's like, oh, I can get behind that. We can work on that together. I'm like, yes. So I have this very, very, it's not a complex story that I just want. And I think, you could match music because you're so good at that. You could match the music to the story that I want. And I'd love to be able to give this book. And then I haven't talked to you, but so I'm going to hit you with this on this. I said, and I haven't talked to Lee yet, but I'm actually going to ask Lee to be involved in my funeral. And I want to share this same story. So the two of you, I want you to help me with this funeral. It needs to be simple, but it needs to follow this storyline. Because I think you're both really cool storytellers. So you may say I'm not doing it, but I want you to know that I have in my perfect ending, we work on that together. And then you weave something.
I would be honored to. It will be hard, but yes, I'd be honored to. So
yeah. You may not know, I grew up in the funeral business. My dad was a funeral director. So.
I remember you telling me that.
Yeah. So I have been to so many funerals, and I wept at people's funerals I didn't even know. But I do think there's an opportunity when you have one to, not to make it like egoic, but just to be able to make a nice story could be unique. It doesn't have to be super complex.
I wonder too now, how do you think, if at all, that you're being exposed to death and funerals a lot as a kid shapes your own processing your own impending death?
Yeah, I think it's not as real to people who aren't around it a lot. I mean, death is really, I've been around a lot of death and seen, lifeless bodies. Those people are gone. It's just, now it's a body. And there's a certain amount of that takes away from the sanctity of life, I think, when you're around it a lot. But there's also some level of beauty to see people's stories and to see people come and they care and they're hurting. And if you can have it be, everybody said, well, we want it to be a celebration. If you can have it be, if the service can be aimed at the audience in a really, really sweet, respectful way, that I think it can be special. Yeah. It also can be weird. I mean, I've been to a lot of weird funerals that you're like,
I bet.
Nobody has anything really that nice to say. And, so my expectations, what I'm saying is I don't have huge expectations around a funeral. I'd like it to be simple. Ange and I've talked about maybe being cremated, not being put in the ground somewhere. There's like elements of this that we're still trying to figure out that are, I guess, more on the details of it than is necessary to talk about here. But it's not something I've ever really wanted to think about. But I now that it's closer to me, it's like I need to figure it out. And I would rather not leave that all to, some really, really grief-stricken family member to solve for me. It's like these things are planned out. Here's who's gonna be involved in it. Here's the way this is gonna play out. And my model for that is my dad. My dad really, because he was a lifelong field director, he had everything to the. I don't know if I told you this story. If I did, you can stop me. But at my dad's funeral in Alabama, the guy that was leading the service died at the cemetery. Did I tell you this story?
No.
It's pretty. So the night before at the visitation, the guys that I forget his name. I think his name might have been Ernie. He said, "I won't be at the church tomorrow. I'm going to be at the grave, making sure everything is right for the graveside part. So I just want to let you know, Clay, that I won't be there. Your dad's wishes. I just want to make sure everything at the cemetery is right." So okay, he told me who would be at the church. So we're at the church where my grandfather, Church of Christ in Childersburg, Alabama. We're at the church where my grandfather used to preach, where my parents were married, where my mom's funeral was, where my dad's second wedding was, and now his funeral. So all of these things have happened at this little church. And then we go to this little cemetery and we're riding up and there's a truck that they use to pick up the vault. And there's it's basically a mobile home. It's like an office. It's just a little country cemetery. And there's a man laying on the front of that mobile home porch. And it's Ernie. And he has helped dig the grave. And the young man is sitting in the truck. They're waiting. And Ernie probably has stepped out to go smoke a cigarette. Now the kid can't see him. He's had a massive heart attack on that front porch and died right there. So his group is driving up. Everyone races over. Ernie's died. Now, it might not be his name, so I'm disrespectful. But what was so weird is what kicked into me is that they're all focused on that. And I stepped up and I said, "You guys do what you need to do here. I got it." So I was raised in the funeral business. I wasn't a funeral director. But so my family, with sort of me leading it, we carried on at the cemetery. And the minister did what he was going to do. And his son and 4 grandsons, buried my father. Lowered the vault. So it's in some weird way, it was kind of this really cool 360 gift. Is my dad I know he would have been smiling. It's like, okay, you finally learned something through all of this. So I think for my nephews and my own sons, you probably don't realize the significance of you actually get to participate in the burial of your grandfather. So,
what a story! Wow.
Yeah.
Well, I'll follow up with you soon about when you want to get together with Randy and talk through things. And
I do have an outline of a book, so it's I want to try to share with you. Here are my thoughts, and I think it could be fun to say, let's talk about these chapters, and you could maybe weave something into those seasons.
Yeah, that sounds great.
Yeah.
Well, great. Well, good to see you.
Good to see you.
Tell Angel I said hi.
I will. Is this still interesting? Is this
Indeed.
Do you have any, you're not discouraged that this is going to be a waste of your time?
Not at all.
Okay, good.
Yeah,
good.
Nope. But yeah, I'm grateful to get to spend time with you.
Same here, Lee. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
All right, my friends.
Peace to you. All right, talk soon.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
My final recorded conversation with Clay was just over 7 months later on December 21. New Year's Eve, which was Clay's predicted Ascension Day, as he called it, was fast approaching, and though he was still mobile, his health had significantly declined since our previous interview.
It's been a long time since we've done this.
It
I
has
can't
been.
remember what we talked about.
We did, I've looked back at what we did and what we talked about. We talked on April 6th, and then we checked in over Zoom on May 6th.
Okay.
And so here we're taping on 21 December. And so since we taped last, you had some good, I think, if I remember correctly, you had some unexpectedly good reports, and then also decided maybe to do some radiation later that maybe you hadn't planned to do earlier.
Yes.
But what's the latest status on where things are?
Yeah, so I would say 2022 was mostly marked more by the complications related to having to put stents into my bile duct system. So that's really what caused me to be sick in 2022. From a cancer perspective, they identified a handful of tumors that had moved. So it originally was in my colon, but it was in my lymph nodes. So it moved from my colon, and then we had tumors in my liver, which has been resected a couple of times, and I had an ablation procedure. So I've had 3 specific procedures on my liver. And then this year, they found a couple of tumors on my lungs, and that's where the radiation came in. And we radiated 4, is that right? 3 or 4 tumors, and it actually worked.
And that was back in the summer?
In the summer, late summer. And I tolerated that really. Chemo was really hard, but which I did in 2020, end of 2021. 2022, I did radiation in the summer on those tumors. It worked. Unfortunately, when I went back, while those 3 tumors had shrunk, they found, I think it's 5 new tumors on my lungs. And that amount of cancer, it doesn't make sense to radiate because it would do more damage to my lungs, even though it appears to work. They're not recommending that anymore just based on the amount of new tumors. So at this point, I'm trying to do more trying some Eastern techniques that hopefully will just extend my life, but I'm not in a curative mode. I think I may have said that last time. I'm in a palliative mode at this point. So they've essentially said the things that we tried didn't work. Your cancer has been sort of slow growing in the past, but it might, and it likely will pick up and from a pace perspective. So that's really what happened in 2022 is that reality that we knew was probably going to happen has now happened. So I feel pretty good, but I currently have, I think it's 5 tumors in my lungs. I have 1 apparent new tumor in my liver, somewhat in the same spot that it keeps coming back. And then I have 1 in my peritoneum, which I wasn't even familiar with. That's like the lining of your stomach. So there's, it continues to grow. That's just where we are.
When did you get this most recent news?
It's been about a month ago. So, and maybe, I think the middle of November, maybe the 15th of November, something like that, which was a hard news because we really, there are potentially some future clinical trials that I might be a candidate for that my oncologist is wanting me to consider. He's also wants me to consider a 3rd form of chemotherapy. But I may have told you this last year. I had arrived at the place that I'm not likely to do that. If there was a clinical trial that had real promise, I'd consider that. But another round of chemo is probably not going to happen. I don't see the math doesn't really justify it. The likelihood of it working, the first 2 were pretty likely. If it's going to work, these are the most likely sort of formulas. This 3rd one would be the 3rd most likely. So it's a 30% chance and a 20% chance. This would be even less than that. So I don't think that makes sense to do that.
Yeah. So when you got that news, you referred to it as hard. What was that like for you emotionally, processing that most recent round?
I think it's probably harder to watch my wife because the roller coaster is really hard for her. For me to process dying has probably a different internal response than someone you love that you can't take it for them. You can't, it's nothing you can do about it. You have to just watch. You don't, and my pain level has been higher. So I've really focused more on pain management in the last few months. So I would say for me, the unknown of like when you walk through the oncology area at Vanderbilt, and you see all of the really, really sick people and emaciated people, to think that might be the path that you're headed, I think is scary. At least it is for me. Not to say I'm not totally at peace around death. It's the process of getting from here to there is actually causing maybe more. I think anxiety is maybe the right word. That there's definitely some fear of the unknown from a pain perspective.
So that raises two questions I want to ask about. One is just thinking about pain with elevated pain levels. What are you learning about dealing with pain? What are strategies, ways you're framing it mentally, psychologically, physical strategies? What are you learning about dealing with pain?
Yeah, I think, so at a very macro level, I think dealing with pain offers growth. I think there's something, something sort of spiritual of realizing life is hard. There's pain in life, and you can see it more tangibly when you have what I'm going through. And now practically, what am I going to do about it? So there's the one level of, okay, this is hard. I can do hard things. I can still model who I want to model while I'm going through this. And hopefully people that know me and love me will benefit from watching me walk through this in a way that is glorifying. That all sounds good, and there's the actual fear of it. And like, okay, I didn't sleep at all last night, and I don't know how to function today because I was in pain all night. So there's like the emotional, mental part of wrapping my head around it. Then there's the practical of, well, I didn't sleep any last night, so I've got to come up with some other strategy here. Mm-hmm. And I'm still figuring that out. So that's the truth is I'm pretty opposed to. I have wonderful doctors, and they would write a script for anything that I need, whether it's antidepressant, pain meds, anxiety meds. They want to help me with that. I have some pretty strong preferences not to take like opioids or not to take antidepressants. I want to feel what I'm feeling. I don't want to be too numbed from that. So. At least for now. Now, at some point, I may say, I want to be totally numb to this.
Right. Yeah. What have you described that as a process you're learning to deal with that kind of pain? Are you beginning to identify yet any particular ways that seem to be helpful to you?
Yeah. So I have changed. I've added to my routine a couple of things. I'm trying to do, when I work out, I'm trying to do we have a sauna in our house because of we just do. So every day I'm trying to do some of workout, do sauna work, so sweat. And then I've picked up ice baths. So getting into a 38 to 40 degree tub for shooting for 10 minutes is unbelievably hard. I remember when you and I did a class together, you talked about cold showers, and I would tell you, this amps that up a little bit.
I bet. I know it's still sitting out there for me. If one of these days I want to learn how to do that, but
I've got a friend of mine who does it every day at 4:30, and he said it hasn't gotten any easier. I dread it every single time, but I feel so amazing afterwards. Huh. So there's some almost like a runner's high that you get from doing that. I've also connected with a naturopathic. That's probably not the right way to say that word. So I have a person who has started cooking meals for me, and then I have a lady who works with him to try to dial in. And I've got a 13-week program that I'm doing, which is Whole30 on the beginning and the end of it. And then inside of that 13 weeks, there'll be a couple of weeks where we do broth, shakes, juices, and then I did a 9-day fast, water fast, about a month ago. And I felt really good during that. So trying to give my body more time to focus on healing and less on processing. So in this 13-week, each quarter I'm trying to my goal is to do a 14-day fast as part of that 13 weeks. So there'd be Whole30, then the broth, juice, shakes, fasting, broth, juice, shakes, then Whole30. And then I have, that's 12 weeks. The 13th week, I'm calling it my wild card week, where I'll probably go to Taco Bell.
Good for you.
Yeah. So so there's the.
I think I would need the wild card week so that I could psychologically help myself get through all the other stuff.
That's exactly why I put it there.
Yeah.
Like, I may not go to Taco Bell, but just the fact that I was giving myself the flexibility that I'm going to go get a Blizzard.
Yeah. We haven't talked about this yet, but Dr. Kubler-Ross, is the researcher who came up with the so-called stages of grief, and she, I'm no expert on this, but as I understand it, she came up with originally 5 stages of grief in working with folks who were terminally ill, and then I think originally she must have depicted the 5 stages of grief as kind of linear. You start at the beginning of the process and then go through it. And then later she apparently regretted thinking of it as a linear process, but more as in and out of different phases that you can kind of bounce around, as I understand it. And then she added 2 more because the original 5 didn't seem to cover everything. But the 7-stage grieving process that she ended up with are shock, initial response of emotional paralysis or numbness, shock, denial, anger, bargaining, depression, testing, which is, as I understand, is kind of trying to find new ways to cope with loss and rebuilding life after acceptance of the loss, and then finally acceptance. And again, as I said, I understand that she saw that not necessarily in the end as a kind of, you start here and go there, but you can be in and out of these stages. But when you hear those, shock, denial, anger, bargaining, depression, testing, and acceptance, when you hear that list, which of those in particular stand out to you as, oh yeah, I know what it looked like for me to go through X or Y or Z?
Yeah, I would say, well, all of them, I have experienced all of them. And I think what you said is true. It's not sequential in nature for sure. I'm in one, I'm out of it, I'm back over here. I think I've overcome this issue and I find myself really pissed off again.
Yeah.
So it's like I've spent a fair amount of time in the anger, and I'm not, as a personality, I'm not a person who is angry that often. I look at the world, I always give people sort of the benefit of the doubt for why they do bad things. I'm probably tend to be too much the other way, that I don't get angry about things that maybe I should get angry about. So it's not comfortable for me because I'm in denial, and then I'm trying to figure out how to navigate life, how to live knowing that there is an end, and I don't know when it is. I think I told you last time I picked an Ascension Day, which is 12/31 of 21, so that's now like 10 days away. And from all appearances, I'm going to probably go past that, it looks like. And that's really been more the issue for me, is trying to navigate. I'm not going to, at least the way it looks today, I'm not going to recover from this. It's not like it's a loss that you grieve and you get over it and life goes on. I think life goes on, but I don't understand the form of that. So it's an unknown, the unknown, and not being able to plan for life like normal people who aren't thinking about death. Like when you're 55 and you're thinking about raising grandkids and all the things that happen in life, what's in front of you. I'm trying to navigate, well, I don't really know. And I know that's true for all of us, but there's something more real about it when you have a terminal illness. It's like this, it's one thing to say, yes, live in the moment. It's something else to realize, okay, well, this might be your last Christmas. And people think about it that way.
Yeah.
Like I think my wife thinks this is probably our last Christmas.
Yeah.
Well, that makes it more somber. It makes it more whatever. And also makes it like now there's pressure for me. I'm supposed to do something, I don't know, something more memorable for my family on this holiday. And in many ways, I just feel like not saying anything. You know, that's probably been what I've struggled with, is there's some fatigue with cancer or any probably long-term illness. There's a fatigue of, I don't really want this to be over, because being over means I'm not around anymore. But I'm fatigued from the conversation of it, the daily life with it, how it impacts food, how it impacts sleeping, how it impacts planning. If you know that a lot of our things we planned to do, I ended up in the hospital, or I ended up being sick and having to come home. So I think that part has just been frustrating to me, that navigating life with it has been harder than I imagined.
When you said you spent more time in anger than maybe one might expect for you, your personality, what was the, if you're open to sharing, what was the nature of the anger, or what was the object of the anger?
Yeah, I might not answer this. I'm realizing I'm not answering your questions as directly. I'm sort of coming around like, this is not exactly the answer.
You answer however you want.
So let me back up to say, I think that my learning about myself is that I have always appeared very calm, and that has served me well in many ways from my career, because as a leader, I embraced, hey, if it's stressful, that's totally fine. I have a calm style about me. But internally, I have a very excitable. So I think while I present very calm on the outside, I realize on the inside I'm not calm at all. And people don't realize that. And I didn't realize that. I would have said, bring on the stress. I can handle it. I get paid to do that kind of stuff. I now realize that my makeup doesn't handle the internal stress as well as I thought. And so that almost makes me angry at myself. Like I've caused, and I think that I'll go off a little bit of a tangent here. I think one of the downsides of cancer in the Western world is that you almost buy into this belief that you did nothing wrong. You didn't cause cancer. You didn't. And so there's nothing you can do to stop it, fix it. You just have to kind of ride along with whatever your oncologist is telling you. And I just don't believe that. So the whole system sort of makes me angry. It's like, I actually believe if we were better educated, preventing these acute illnesses is the right answer. Because once you have it, now you're just in, how do I mitigate what's going to happen to me? Well, the real win would have been how to understand yourself better and not have it be, well, there's nothing you could have done. Well, there's absolutely things I could have done
to lower the odds.
Of getting what I got. And I think there's a certain amount that we all understand. You see people who live their lives with that in mind, but then there's so much denial of not getting enough rest and how important that is. And life is going to be hard. That's just reality, but not putting yourself in unnecessary stressful situations that you might not handle as well. But I think whether it's a male thing or it's just a human thing, there's a denial of that. Like the self-care part of my background is what probably makes me angry. A lot of this could have been avoided if I had a better understanding of my own makeup, and I wasn't so, if my ego wasn't so tapped into how important it is that these things that I value make up who I am. And the current version of Clay would have said, I don't want to do that type of role, because that's going to cause me a lot of stress. And find a lifestyle that matched, that better.
That's fascinating. So just to clarify, I hear you saying, I don't hear you saying we should accept that, well, if I do X, Y, and Z, then I kind of get what I deserve. But instead, I hear you saying, from your perspective now, you've learned that there were certain things that you could have done to sharply mitigate the odds that you would be dealing with cancer at this point in your life.
Right. And there might be hard things. hard choices. But I think what you're saying is I'm not walking around like blaming myself. It's not, there's a fine line between, but I think we try to go the other direction and say there's nothing you could have done. And that's just not true. That for the most part, my cancer diagnosis had very little to do with my like hereditary makeup. It had to do with the environment that I put myself into, because and I walked myself into a lot of the situations that I would say caused some of the unsettled nature of my internal. It's sort of when you think about your internal environment, the terrain of your environment inside of you. I think I could have done a better job of being aware of that and trying to avoid the excitability that's going on and all the stuff that's flowing through your body.
So your anger then has been directed, if I understood you correctly, your anger has been directed to some degree at yourself and to some degree at the system that didn't allow us to see better. Yes,
and I look at it today, and when I go to when I'm at the oncology ward at Vanderbilt, and I watch, giving out ice cream. It's just things like there's things that don't even really make sense to me, because I think we train people that they're ignorant around how we got where we are. And I just want the doctor to tell me what to do, and let's do chemo again. So that whole system feels wrong to me. That's, I guess, that's the best way to put it. And I love my oncologist. That's what's kind of the funny conundrum, is that I love the Western team that I have. I just wish that there was a better blend of other alternatives.
So thinking about those stages again: shock, denial, anger, bargaining, depression, testing, and acceptance. Which of those others of those stand out as, I see me going through that?
Because I see me in all of them, and they're funny because I would say I don't spend a ton of time in bargaining, but I have done that. Like, I'm trying to figure out how to, and I'm aware of that. It's like to try to work with God on, hey, I know you can. I know you can make this go away. Why won't you? What can I do?
Yeah.
Anyway, I don't spend a lot of time there, but I have spent some time there. And I would say denial. I'll just wake up and I've said to Ange, I don't think I want to go to the doctor anymore. I don't want to go anymore. I don't even want to get the updates anymore. I just want to walk through life, and it'll be what it's going to be. And I'm not totally certain that I won't do that at some point. I mean, I may just stop going. I don't know if I would call that denial, but it is sort of I just don't want to see it anymore. It's like I'm tired of thinking about it.
Yeah. That almost seems like it could be denial, or it also, in certain ways, could be acceptance, I guess.
Yes, like a coping acceptance of. And I would say I feel like when I'm doing the things that make me more at peace, which is getting up early and journaling and spending my morning time like mentally preparing for the day, I'm in a more of an acceptance mode. But that's also just part of my, if I'm operating from a proactive place in almost everything in my life, I'm more calm and I'm more accepting. If I find myself in a more reactive mode, then I think I spin out of, like, now I'm potentially depressed. I think I don't know that I totally understand depression, but I would say I have some level of that again, it might surprise you that through this entire journey, and I'm not proud about this, I haven't gotten any therapy at all, which doesn't really make sense. Probably there's lots of huge life events, and I have used therapy in the past, but the fact that I haven't through this entire thing is, like, for where I am now in the process, it's interesting to me that I haven't, use therapy as one of the things to help me with processing what I'm going through.
So I think the first time we talked on tape, we talked about this notion of memento mori from the philosophers about, remember you're going to die, remember the day of your death. And so for a lot of the Greek philosophers, the intentional daily remembering that you're going to die was a key to philosophy. And so for some of them, the very notion of kind of living your life in sight of the day of your death was central to living a good life. And you've shared how, you kind of, for this year in particular, was December 31 set out as a marker. You were going to set your year and do certain things, and you've shared how some of those things got inhibited by your illness. But so not so much from the angle of what activities did you do and see those as glad you got to do them, but in terms of the posture of remembering your death and going about your year this way, what would be some things that you would say when I look back at this year, that there was a relational encounter, a relationship encounter that seems to you to have been a marker for you of success and kind of memento mori, or are there things that you've done this year in an attempt to kind of remember you're going to die very intentionally? Are there occasions that have occurred that you kind of keep playing back to yourself as, yeah, that was a moment of grace, or I'm so grateful I got to experience that?
Yeah, I think, so there were some things that didn't happen, but there were a lot of things that did happen. So I got to, without going into all the different events, I got to be very mindful of spending time with people that just to say what I was trying to do was do events with people that we have a common love for that event, or that whether it's a restaurant or playing golf with that person or flying or doing something that is either a hobby of theirs that I also enjoy, that we would remember doing together. That was the sort of the macro thing. It's let me pick something. So for one friend, it might be, hey, we used to play golf together. Let's go somewhere fun. And I want to soak it in that this is my last time playing golf with you. Now, whether that actually ends up being true or not, I want to be in the moment that way. And I also have had fun looking at people and thinking, I may never see you again. And I want this to be a very intentional goodbye for me. And not in a weird way, because I think for people that are on the other side of this, like, what is he? He's looking at me weird, and it's not good. And they don't realize I'm saying I'm probably not ever going to see you again, and I'm hugging you different. So I probably had a dozen of those this year with people that I likely won't see again. That I had in my life. These are people that were special to me, and I have some that I'm still wanting to do that are still out there on sort of my list. But I'm trying to give myself a little bit, if I'm not careful, then it becomes like a checklist that creates stress for me. It's like, I gotta figure this out. I'm too sick to go do this trip or that trip. So I've set all that down to just say, like I said, let's say it was 12 people. The 12 that I did get to do things with, it was pretty amazing. I have these other folks I still want to do something with. And if it works out, great. If it doesn't, the intention was there, and I know they know that, I know that. But I think 2022, in many ways, was one of my very best years from doing things that I think mattered. Not just for me, but for the folks that I was able to do those things with.
Yeah. So for those who are not dealing with a kind of diagnosis that you're dealing with, but may want to try to figure out how to better live that way, what sort of advice or words would you have for people who say, I want to live that way all the time? What would you encourage to help people lean into that?
My own learning is that I'm a person who processes internally more fear, and I operate out of fear a lot. And so that dictates things I don't do, things I do, maybe jobs that I took, things I stayed in longer than I should have. And so I have tried to, in 2022, operate not in a place of fear. That a lot of things are not in my control. In fact, most things are not in my control. So that's the one thing to me that I've learned in this process, is that life is a lot more enjoyable if I can get out of that fear of failure, fear of whatever. And I just think there's a lot more of that. I've noticed that a lot in my children. Like, I noticed they operate out of fear a lot, which is probably something I passed down to them. They experienced from that in their childhood. I don't know what's really behind that. I could theorize some of that has to do with maybe your childhood, your parents' situation, your religious upbringing. There's lots of things that mix into that soup that creates an environment where you operate in many ways out of avoiding things or fear. And in 2022, I've become more aware of how that has driven my life, and I'm less inclined to allow fear to dictate what I'm going to do next. So I think that would be the thing, if I could recommend and I'm trying to do this with my children, is, thrive. If you want to do something, go try to do it. That doesn't mean do it flippantly. I mean, plan well, but don't be stymied by fear. So, go live your life. So I think that's, for me, a lot of the things I've done this year is because there was an urgency that I needed to do them. But also, I've set down the fear that I was going to disappoint someone, or I'm not going to be where I need to be because I'm, off doing something that I want to do.
Yeah, that's very helpful. Another thing we talked about in April was this passage from science writer Winfred Gallagher, who wrote the book Wrapped. And this passage out of her book, because she's writing about her own experience with cancer, and she said that her curiosity, and I've got this from Cal Newport's writing about her, but he talked about her curiosity was piqued by not being, quote, mired in fear and self-pity, but it was instead, she noted, often quite pleasant, her experience in focusing on the things that mattered to her. And she came up with what she called a grand unified theory of the mind. And she said, quote, like fingers pointing to the moon, other diverse disciplines from anthropology to education, behavioral economics to family counseling similarly suggests that the skillful management of attention is the sine qua non of the good life and the key to improving virtually every aspect of your experience. So how, after this year, how would you say for you it's helpful or not to think about management of your attention as a sort of absolutely necessary task to your daily life?
Yeah, I think that I have a natural intellectual curiosity for almost anything in life. And I think it's been more turned on knowing that I have a limit to, a natural limit to how long I'm going to live. So my curiosity to experience life in a more full way, and I mean that in the most, I mean that in from a religious perspective, I truly believe the good life, the flourishing life, is the life that Jesus modeled. And I don't think I've always felt that. It's like I was giving up something to try to be good. It's the path of those two crossing for me, my health issue, then maybe just wisdom of getting older, paying attention to every day and realizing I have the opportunity to try to be a positive difference in whatever the situation is I'm in, not from an ego perspective, just from seeing how I can affect life, my own life, the joy that it brings me to be present, to pay attention, to see, is there something I can do in this situation that might be good or helpful, is a more enjoyable way to live that I don't think I totally grasped without cancer. So I don't know if that's a answer to your question.
Yes,
but
quite so. The other thing I wanted to ask earlier that you mentioned, when you're kind of seeing folks who are in late stages of cancer in the cancer ward, and you think about the the process of death. And I heard you say you're somewhat at peace about the notion of dying, but the process itself might give you some anxiety. Would you talk to us more about that?
Yeah, I think every day having it somewhat it impacts everything I do, like my health, and trying to lengthen that at some level. It has a lot of positives. I'm doing trying to do a lot of positive things for my health. But it also seems to require a lot of time and attention. Can you say that question again?
Yes. When you think about the process of death,
Yeah.
what do you anticipate? What does it rattle you to think about the process that you're going to have to go through, or what are you anticipating it's going to be like as you go through that process of actually dying?
Yeah. Okay. Sorry. I think I have endured a lot of physical pain through this cancer journey, more than I ever experienced before. I mean, I've never been in the hospital before cancer. Really, I've never spent a night in the hospital. And so, as things progress, I have every little pain now is like, is that cancer or is that just being 55? I mean, so there's a certain amount of, there's little pains, and everything gets associated with cancer. And I have to communicate more to like my doctors. This is happening, that's happening. But things like having difficulty breathing, pain when I breathe, and then knowing, well, that's because you got 5 new tumors on your lungs. And maybe that's not even why I'm having pain. I mean, I don't actually know. It could just be that I'm, I don't know, I'm not taking care of myself or whatever. But so the specific pains that are associated with knowing you have something foreign in your body that is growing, and that it's not a friend, that it's not there for good reasons. Seeing how that can take over is what I'm afraid of, because I feel pain in my lungs now. I feel pain in my back that's related to probably the fluid that I had on me before. So there's just things that continue to get a little bit worse. And when I look at where that will go, as far as not being able, like my system, my whole processing of food is becoming more difficult. So those are just things that it's unknown to me of how bad is that going to get. And yeah, I think I have a high tolerance for pain, but it's being tested. And so I have a fear of, I don't want to be, I want to be present. But part of being present is you're going to feel that pain. So that's the conundrum I'm struggling with, is I want to be present for as long as I can be. I don't want to be, it's painful to me to watch what this experience, 6 years of this, has done to my wife. There's a certain part of that I'm ready for that to end for her. It's like, this is long. Yeah. So I mean, there's a certain amount of that the pain that I'm going through, she sees it and she can't take it from me. And I watch that, how it impacts her, and it's really hard for me.
As we kind of get close to the end here, so there's old conventional wisdom about not leaving things unsaid that you ought to say. And it sounds to me, as you describe, you're being intentional about trying to be with people. It's fascinating to me to think about the way you're trying to say something through action, but not necessarily the words. You're not necessarily saying, well, this may be the last time we play golf together.
Right.
But you're saying something by your presence. But as you think about just not leaving things unsaid, what are things that just occur now that you may have already said to people or out loud to yourself, but what are things that you kind of come to top of mind of things that you want to say again as you are at this point in your journey?
Yeah, I think sometimes that is maybe more challenging for men than it should be, that we don't express how much we love people and how, last night, for example, we had my sister and 3 of my 4 sons over, and 2 of my grandkids were over, and I'm just sitting around the table and I'm just so thankful. And so just being able to actually say that and not have it turn the whole night into like a reminder that I just want to be able to enjoy the joy of we're enjoying each other's time here. And I want us to soak that in because I'm soaking it in. So I think saying it to people is powerful, to tell people how much you appreciate them. It's a little bit awkward for me because then people turn it into a cancer conversation, which is not really, the thing that I'm trying to avoid is taking air out of a room because of the topic.
Yeah.
But being grateful and thankful for, and so many people are uncomfortable with that. Oh, let's don't talk about that. You're going to be fine. I know it's all going to work out. That to me is the conundrum as I try to be real with people in not a large percentage, but a reasonable percentage of people don't want to even engage in that. It's like, oh, you're going to be fine. I'm like, well, people die. So, it's just part of the natural. And we should be present for the time we have together. So yeah. When I look at what I want is to not be a downer and be able to, but not avoid having conversations. That's the challenge I'm trying to say, is that I look at, I have this really sweet relationship that's started probably about 2 months ago with Sandra Collins. I didn't even know her. I've not been at Otter Creek for like everybody else. So I know who she is, and I've seen her in the bulletin. And for some reason, it was a Sunday when Ange wasn't there, and I was there, and I'm sitting in my spot, and Sandra and her husband, what's her husband's name? Jerry, are sitting right behind me. And somehow we strike up a conversation, and so I tell her a little bit about my health issues. She shares her health issues, and we've become like best buds. She looks for me like, oh, I'm so glad you're here. And I do the same, because we both are, there's like a common, but it's in a really positive way. She's, it's sweet to know that, okay, here's a person who's walking through their own really challenging season. And when I see her, she'll say, well, how was your week? Because she knows we share some similar probably challenges. But it's such a positive thing to see. So
yeah. And I think this is one of the reasons I was so interested in us having these conversations, was because it does seem to me that you've really done that really well in terms of those 2 things that you said, of you're wanting to find a way to be open about the fact that, well, we all die, but it's coming to you more quickly than you wanted.
Yes.
While also trying to find a way to do that can be an open, honest conversation that's not a downer, and that's not about, to use your language, sucking the air out of the room, but it's about, no, this is life.
Yes.
And so how do we deal with the realities that life hands us?
Right. And be thankful about it. And I think there's also one of the things I have experienced, and it could just be I'm internalizing it, but I think there's a certain amount of, almost when I talk about death, that I sometimes feel like people think I don't have faith. Well, you don't have enough faith to think this is going to, get fixed. Like, well, I don't actually approach it that way. People die, and bad things happen to good people all the time. My theology it's not a lack of faith. It's actually, I think it's the opposite. I'm trying to do what I think Jesus modeled in the garden, which is he was very clear about what he wanted to happen. And he was very submissive to, I'm going to walk the path that I'm going to walk, and I'm going to lean on you, God, when I do it. So I'm very clear in my conversations with God that I really want you to take this away from me. And I also want to be present for every day that I'm still here. And hopefully in the most positive way I can be, recognizing that internally I'm not always in a great space. Yeah. So there are plenty of times when I'm in a bad headspace, but I'm trying to not have that become the major story about my last season. But does that make sense?
It makes lots of sense.
I'm struggling with it.
Yeah.
And I have the aspirations of how I want to live this out. And most days, and I don't want it to be fake. I don't want it to be like, oh, I'm just pretending on the outside that I'm at peace, when internally I am just really, really upset. Those are both true. Some days I'm faking that I want to be at peace because I want to be at peace. So let me just try to act it out and maybe it'll happen more, but some days I'm not at peace at all.
Yeah. In my mind, that honors all the rest of us much more than certainly acting.
Yes.
Trying to live into it while also saying internally I can be a mess.
Yes.
Any other final thoughts come to mind, top of mind you want to share?
I guess I think I appreciate you doing this, whatever this ends up, whatever you do, you may just turn it off at some point. I appreciate you allowing me the opportunity to do this with you. It's been very helpful. For anybody who would hear this later, I think everyone who knows me hopefully knows the spirit of I have such wonderful thoughts around all the people in my life and how they've impacted me. I want people's memories of me to be, I think this is just human nature, to be all the good things. I want people to not remember all of my flaws, and there are plenty of those, but to remember that I loved, and I loved well, and I loved deeply. That's really my hope of what people will remember about me. And I don't think our memories of, they're one generation or at most maybe, but hopefully there's and part of what I'm trying to do with interacting with people is that hopefully when you think of me, you'll think about this session and it'll be a positive memory for you.
Yeah.
That's that small little thing is what I'm I think if our lives have some of that in it, then that's a super positive thing.
Yeah. Thank you, Clay.
Yeah. Thank you, Lee.
This has been a gift. Thank you.
Yeah. Same. Appreciate it.
I do really appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah.
You've honored a lot of people by sharing what you've shared. So thank you.
Thank you. All right, my friend.
Smiling Elephant.
Let's do it.
Let's do it. Clay and I shared lunch at the Smiling Elephant, a favorite Thai restaurant here in Nashville. New Year's Eve, Clay's predicted day of his passing, came and went. Spring arrived, cherry blossoms and the magnolias bloomed, and Clay passed away on June 20 with his wife Angela and his family by his side. Our thanks to all the stellar team that makes this show possible: Christy Bragg, Jacob Lewis, Sophie Byard, Tom Anderson, Kate Hayes, Mary Evelyn Brown, Jason Cheesley, Audrey Griffith, and Tim Lauer. And a special thank you and credit to Carriet Harmon for producing this episode with such care. Thanks for listening, and let's keep exploring what it means to live a good life together. No Small Endeavor is a production of PRX, Tokens Media LLC, and
Great Feeling Studio.